You know, it's tough for me to take a step back sometimes and look at Baldurs Gate 3 in a critical sense. I've racked up over 1,200 hours in the game, and it's produced some of my favorite memories. Hell, it's what I make my damn videos on. But there's always been one thing that's irked me about this experience, and I've tried to ignore it because I hate that it's true. Act 3 is kinda just okay? Listen, getting to Baldur's Gate for the first time was something magical. Meeting Gortash, the Murder Tribunal, the House of Hope, I will never forget it. Though I think we'll find that it's not the actual content that hurts Act 3 the most. It might be what surrounds that content that's the real culprit. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy. Today, I'm going to be checking out Baldur's Gate 3's final act, and seeing why it just doesn't stack up to the two that came before it. It offers arguably the most epic moments in the game, so what's the issue? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. Let me know what problems you had with Act 3 below, and don't forget to leave a like on the video to help me out, and subscribe if you want more critical analyses like this one. Before we start dunking on Act 3 though, I want to tell you about how you can dunk on epic bosses with hundreds of different unique champions in the realm of Teleria, all from the comfort of your smartphone. I mean, they all just scream epic fantasy, especially the legendary champion you can unlock for free by downloading today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Just don't forget to use the promo code UDKing once you're in. He's got some incredibly powerful abilities, like Too Awesome to Die, where he becomes the tank I always look for in any RPG I play. Combine that with the party support he offers through shields and heals, and you'll have a hard time taking him out of your raids. If you find me under my name Figuring Out Fantasy, join the clan FOF and you'll see just how much I use him myself. As a new player, you'll also get Ultimate Galek instantly from the massive starter pack. And once you use these resources to get to level 15, you'll unlock another amazing epic from the orcs, Zargala. Either complement them with the Ultimate Death Knight, or use one of the other 5 promo codes available for 48 hours after you download to iron out your party. Use Tree Hugger for Green Warden, get Alice for Alice the Wanderer, Desert Queen for Tahanarok, Monkey King for Sun Wukong, or Demon Slayer for Thol and Foulbeard. You can only pick one of them, so choose wisely. It's probably not hard to guess what code I redeemed. Use the link in my description and pinned comment, or scan the QR code to start your adventure in Teleria today. It's a no-brainer with how much they're giving to new players. Thanks to Raid for sponsoring today's video. Now let's figure this out. The road to Baldur's Gate was a long one, but there was never a lull in pacing. Act 1 still never fails to keep me moving from one point of interest to another, and the way the story accelerates within Act 2 just amps me up without fail. When you reach the Emerald Grove after pushing through the Ravaged Beach, for example, you'll have a hard time walking 10 feet without getting into something new. There's clearly distressed tieflings that we can try to offer help to, or druids who run the place that likely have opportunities for us to engage with. Not to mention that most of these quests can be resolved without having to stray too far, even without leaving the grove in many cases. Quick from start to finish, but rich in flavor all the way through. And even when you do wander further out into Act 1, many conflicts circle back to this sanctuary, which helps a lot in a game with such a short leash attached to its players. You can wander as much as you like, maybe pick up a quest or two while you're out, and always know that you can teleport back to the grove to get back on track, which honestly contributes a lot to why the prospect of a goblin invasion was so heavy. Then when that's taken care of, the decision on what path to take into the Shadow-Cursed lands felt like a graduation into the meat and potatoes of the adventure. Now I could sit here and praise the Underdark or the Mountain Pass all I want, but it really just boils down to a dense focus of content that rewarded us in exploring it all, just like everything that came before it. There was still tons of character development along the way, and it was tough to put my controller down. And once we get to Act 2, we'll find the Last Light Inn, which serves a similar but more relevant role in our journey than the Emerald Grove did. When you first find Last Light, it's truly one of the biggest sighs of relief imaginable. I've had to take turn-based mode off one too many times. No, but seriously, what an awesome checkpoint for a player to reach. The way Halsin described the Shadow Curse made me feel like Act 2 was going to be suffocating. And well, he's not really wrong, but he didn't say that there would essentially be another Emerald Grove to take a breather in, with protection fueled from our second favorite cleric, Isabel. And she kinda leads me to another great part about this safe zone. The longer you stay and chat with the inhabitants, the more invigorated you become to cleanse the curse and defeat Ketheric Thorm. And that really shifts the perspective on how serious the plot is becoming. Though it is worth mentioning that speaking to Isabel can trigger an abrupt combat encounter, and one that could end up having dramatic consequences for the shield around the camp. You're incentivized to seek out protection from the curse, but it can end up making things a lot harder. Doesn't help that Isabel tries her best to die either. But if I'm being honest, no matter how things play out, every scenario immerses you deeper into the matters at hand. Whether the only protected sanctuary in the area lives to fight another day, or is just simply absorbed by the Shadow Curse. So why have I been talking about Acts 1 and 2 so far when the video's supposed to be about why Act 3 was the worst? Because these are just a fraction of the examples where they present their content in far different and seemingly more efficient ways than Act 3 does. The city may have more content, but it ends up feeling like less when we start bringing up what made us love the adventure so far. So let's start by circling back to the beginning of Act 3. We just defeated Ketheric Thorm and the Avatar of Merkel after quite the climactic series of events, followed by the biggest reveal of the entire campaign. So when I arrived at Rivington with the colors popping just like the first act, I just felt a wave wash over me and everything was okay. Good vibes and murderous clowns. Yeah, Rivington certainly is peaceful for the most part, but it still keeps you on your toes with potential fights, which followed the trends of Acts 1 and 2 pretty well, and it had me taking my time exploring every inch of this area just like I had done throughout the entire game. The festival, for example, consists of so much to dig into on its own. Steal this guy's cheat ring and tell me you didn't shit yourself when he airdropped you into Dino Land. Or maybe this is where your first run-in with Orin was when you took the lover's quiz. Okay, what could I possibly have to say that's negative about this? Especially once we gain access to the south span of Worm's Crossing, I was popping into every shop or sex bar there was. Might have signed my soul away upstairs. But that's irrelevant. Up to this point, I have no complaints. But everything changed when the Fire Nation, when we moved on to Baldurs Gate. Yeah, I'm sad to say it, but things start to fall apart as we enter the sprawling city the game is named after. I do want to mention something quickly though. When I proceed to complain about the various shortcomings of Act 3, understand that I only feel a need to do so because of the bar set by the game up to this point. Now that doesn't mean that lofty expectations are an excuse to not live up to them. I think Starfield learned that the hard way. But my point in mentioning this little disclaimer is to assure you that Act 3 in this game still clears the vast majority of what's out there. That being said, let's get a little critical. You won't notice the issues with the city of Baldurs Gate right away, because the sheer amount of discovery offered to the player as soon as they arrive is overwhelming to the point of being exciting. Except that feeling begins to wear off, and quickly. In my experience, I gather about 3 or 4 quests just maneuvering around my immediate surroundings, and those quests propel me to go further into the city, which in turn causes other points of interest to distract me a bit on the way to the objectives, talk to a couple more people, get a couple more quests, and before you know it, you now have a checklist to tend to instead of a naturally flowing pace for the plot we're involved in. See how it starts to deviate from our experiences in Acts 1 and 2? I did mention how you can't wander far in the Emerald Grove without a new quest finding its way to your journal, but like I said, many of those quests can be resolved in your active vicinity, or when you do have to travel out into the map, it encourages healthy, focused exploration. I guess this is Baldur's Gate after all. Of course there's going to be opportunities around every corner to help someone or interfere, but think of an actual D&D campaign. Things go smoothly when players are dialed into a grand objective and are sprinkled side quests here and there that never truly pull them out of the immersion. Remember when I mentioned that speaking to the members of Last Light invigorated us to pursue the main objective? That's pretty much all but gone here. With the winding twists and turns of the countless quests available, you'll be hard-pressed to find interactions that overlap with each other, or better yet, immerse you into the reality of the situation. You might hear rumblings of absolute worship among the citizens, or resentment against their control over the city, though it never seems quite as potent as speaking to a member of the Emerald Grove or somebody in Last Light. Those individuals brought you deeper into the conflicts of the area, while those you run across in Baldur's Gate tend to feel more like placeholders. The Steel Watch certainly was a well-crafted way for the big bad to keep an eye on the player, and dealing with the Nine Fingers and the shady business that follows was pretty cool too, but even that was drowned out a bit by just how massive this place is and how inconsequential everything ends up feeling, which sorta goes hand in hand with the next issue I have in this area. At first, you might want to fulfill everything in your journal, but I can't lie, things change a bit once you hit level 12 on a second or third time through the game. And this could even be pretty early on in the final act if you're even slightly diligent about completing objectives up to this point. You'll be outclassing most of what the Sword Coast capital has to throw at you with your action surges and level 6 spell slots, and that ends up warping your perspective on how you go about finishing the game. Now, before I go deeper, I'll admit you might not always be maxed out, as I've had to skip certain pieces of content during my live streams where I'm playing a true to character Will Origin run, and I'm a fragile level 6 at the end of the Gauntlet of Shar. Don't think I'll be making it to 12 for a while, but don't get it twisted, the Blades of Frontiers are kicking ass despite it. Streams will be back eventually. But if I'm being honest, I think because of this, combat encounters are going to be a blast to work through once I get to Act 3. Which leads me to believe that the game actively punishes you for covering all of your bases in the adventure. Not a punishment in terms of lacking strength, you'll mow over most of the enemies you'll find. This is about the content that's pitched as some of the most climactic in the game, becoming a value judgment from the player on whether or not it's worth their time to complete. Does the item I get apply to my builds? Do I need the XP? If not, you might find yourself passing over it for a while on playthroughs after your first. Sure, there are plenty of players out there who have only logged a single playthrough, and they'll be interested in completing most of everything the city has to throw at them no matter what, but I don't usually have a problem until I hit this point in the game, even in a 4th or 5th playthrough. I'm far more willing to engage with nearly everything Acts 1 and 2 have to offer, every time. It's kinda just about what order I do them in. With so much square footage to be conscious of in Baldur's Gate, there's not as much of a chance for you to check off objectives in passing as you're traversing the area. There was always a vicinity to the juicy stuff in Acts 1 and 2, and it felt like you didn't have to spread yourself so thin in getting to everything. And that makes Act 3's pool of content feel like there's so much friction in comparison. If the quest isn't up to snuff, it'll end up just as part of that checklist I mentioned earlier, and it might even get ignored entirely. Because unless it's a core checkpoint of progression, it needs to have a seriously enticing chunk of content or a key item for you to want to chase after to complete it. Again, these criticisms aren't pointed at the experience you'll have in places like Cazador's Lair, Ansur's Inner Sanctum, or even the path towards the 2 chosen we have left to conquer, because on their own, they are incredibly captivating moments to engage with. Hell, they even have kick-ass loot to grab as well. So why not do them? It's the whole package. But tell me how many times you found every piece of Dribbles the Clown, or even progressed through every stage of the Mystic Carrion quest. What about that haunted mansion with the painter storyline? If the city wasn't carried by the expertly crafted sequences you can take part in, the sporadic nature of how these quests are handled might leave a bigger blemish on the act than there already is. But how about the storylines we have right at our fingertips no matter where we are? Our companions are a huge source of great content and engaging narratives to take part in, but aside from the resolution of their different character arcs, you'll find that there is much less to talk about with them in passing dialogue. There's bits and pieces in relation to the subplot they're specifically involved with, though through Acts 1 and 2, it felt like I could learn a lot more from this ragtag group of adventurers. For example, Gale and Shadowheart were crucial in getting a deeper understanding of the curse in Rivington town. I understand that some of the most emotionally moving sequences of their quest lines are here to take on in the city, and that's a huge boon for Act 3. But I often found myself wishing for more things to talk to my party about after seeing that leave was the only option. And that's why I kinda like companions like Jaheira or Minsk in Act 3, because even though they don't have an expansive quest line, other than maybe recruiting Minsk, their dialogues are some of the best immersion into Baldur's Gate as a whole. And then there's the Upper City. Oh, the Upper City. So this video isn't going to be diving super deep into this topic as a whole, but I've seen many players quite upset at the lost potential of what fleshing out this area could have offered. And with some of the points I made in this video, it could have been a more focused way to prove just how powerful you've become, only in a manner that doesn't feel like you're always over-prepared for the occasion. Now, we all know that wishing for an expanded Upper City is just us putting our honorary game developer caps on, thinking we know what's best, but the very existence of discussion surrounding it might bring us to some more solid reasoning as to why Act 3 feels the way it does. The final sequence in facing the Elder Brain is just epic. There's no other way to describe it. So I've got no real gripes there. What ends up being the case for me here is that the transition into this segment of the game is just a little soured by what came before it. The complaints I've had so far aside, it always ends up feeling like a decision on whether or not I think it's time to end the game, and perhaps a better framing of moving from stone to stone is what they needed. It is kind of a complicated fix because the plot is focused around us taking care of the 3 Chosen and unintentionally releasing the shackles from the Elder Brain. But let's just lay this out and say that Act 3 cuts back on maybe 25–30% of its content, as well as condense the map slightly to accommodate it. This would make the stream of content feel a bit more focused, and could allow for different points of interest to feel less like they pull you away from the action. Next, we shift a bit more meaningful content into Rivington and Worm's Crossing, so that it can frame what comes in the city a bit better. And now that I mention it, maybe this is where we should be intended to grab Gortash's Netherstone. Yeah, you can do this anyways, but you're not. I'm talking about a way to circumvent the threat of his steel watch all the way back here. Or maybe even a method to spoil his coronation in your advantage. I'm not sure how they would go about doing it, but timing it this way would allow for the Elder Brain releasing from the grasp of the Chosen 3 to give us some urgency as we enter Baldur's Gate, so that descending to the Temple of Baal actively feels like the last step before advancing to the Morphic Pool. Now when we enter the lower city, it's truly closing in on the ending stages of the game. Maybe we don't need more out of the upper city. Okay, I realize that's a lot to change right out of the gate, pun intended, and it's entirely unrealistic to ask for. This would affect the plot of entering the Iron Throne, shutting down Gortash's steel watch would be approached entirely differently, and not to mention, the city would probably be a bit unruly after having their newly announced Grand Duke lose control. Hell, Gortash's bargain would have to be handled entirely differently as well. But doesn't it just show how safe they played it here? Act 1 was inspiring, and Act 2 was utterly chaotic. And I might be able to theorize how I would make this part or that part better, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't change the pacing for anything. For me to have no love lost if some of these quests were either relocated or maybe even cut entirely, gives me an impression that the puzzle pieces didn't quite fit together how they wanted them to. I'm being pretty dramatic in my proposed changes, but you can't just make a few tweaks and correct something with so many moving parts. If we want to think about how we can make Act 3 better, we need to understand why it feels the way it does to begin with. You know that moment where you make your decision on what to do with the Night Song, and it leads straight into the raid on Moonrise, which leads straight into the first fight with Ketheric, which leads straight into the Mind Flayer call? There's just none of that here. It's truly tough. There's something so amazing about the crafting of this massive hub, but I'm constantly taken out of the immersion as soon as I try to get back on track in completing objectives. Regardless of what I discussed earlier in the video about levels, quest rewards, or companion interactions, fixing those problems means nothing if the fundamentals of the act's pacing weren't addressed. And I really only scratched the surface on what I think could be changed on that front. Let me know how you would go about changing Act 3 below. I think it's a pretty tall task, but those are just my impressions. We're here at the end, so I want to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like to let me know. And don't forget to subscribe so you get the next video right in your feed. I also want to thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to use the promo codes I mentioned only for new players, and scan the QR code or click the link in my description or pinned comment. As always, be sure to keep figuring out fantasy. I'll see you in the next one.